Was that the year Scott Cumming kicked like 100 goals?
He didn't kick 100 goals, but he won the Coleman, and Lloyd got full forward in the All-Australian team. And you could hear the howls from Perth.
I remember when Joe got in over Ben Brown in 2017, despite Brown kicking a couple more goals.
Yeah.
And the North Melbourne supporters going absolutely ballistic.
Well, dial that up by a factor of about 11, because there's a shitload more West Coast supporters than there are Norths. And that's what it was like in 99. They were absolutely off their tree. It was all a big Vic conspiracy.
Oh, that makes me happy.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, look, right. I don't think they got too much wrong in terms of the squad. I just think...
Save it for the podcast.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the finals edition of the BigFooty Bombercast for season 2021. That's right, it is a finals edition. The Bombers are there, and we will be playing the Bulldogs this coming Sunday down in Tasmania. But before we dive into it, I'll introduce my co-hosts for this evening. And the first one off the rank is TheGrizz. How are you, mate?
I'm good. I'm in a good mood. Bombers are in the finals, which helps with all the lockdown to take your mind off it. I'm excited. I think we're in with a shot.
And our other guest this evening is a man that I know is suffering through the lockdown as well, and that is Dave. How are you?
Oh, good, thanks, mate. Yeah, look, I'm very excited. I went for a walk before with one of my boys, and I said we wouldn't have thought at the start of the year we'd have been going for a walk after round 23, and we're in the finals, because I just didn't see it. So, yeah, I'm wrapped. Very happy.
Yeah, well, and we will touch on finals very, very shortly, but we did, of course, play a game yesterday, Grizz, and look, I think it was Gumbletron who said on the board, as soon as St Kilda won yesterday, you just knew it was going to be an easy Essendon victory, whereas if Fremantle had won, it probably would have come down to the last kick of the game, and we probably would have either won or lost after the siren. But look, I'll be honest, yesterday's game was good. I enjoyed Draper's performance against Grundy, but I didn't really have a whole lot new to say other than what we've said about our squad throughout the year based on yesterday's game.
Yeah, look, it was as soon as St Kilda won. Good tip, by the way, Bonce. That was 24 hours out. You tipped St Kilda.
I was all over that. I think Law was about ready to stab me at one stage. I was half expecting to get a express bomb in the post delivered.
We all thought you were going to do a Kelvin with the Peter Wright and just absolutely moz us, but it's all good. Yeah, it's interesting. The game, as soon as St Kilda won, you could tell the air just sort of fell out of it. It was sort of like West Coast, when Brisbane were trying to get into the fall, raised a notch to try to stop them. And I think if something was on the line, we'd probably would have got a more fierce competition in Collingwood. But it was a pretty flat game. Look, we did what we had to. We broke their spirits early, got out to a good lead at halftime, and then just sort of cruised towards the end. I thought some really good signs from fringe players, maybe like Alec Waterman, Tom Cutler. There's going to be some push for spots from guys coming back in like Tipper and Langford and some other guys. So you could tell there were a couple of guys out there trying to prove a point to stay in the team. But overall, it was good. I thought the forward line performed well. Dev Smith played his best game, I reckon, for 18 months, which was good to see. But all in all, we got to the game, no injuries, and it was probably the least stressful afternoon I've had all year watching footy.
Yeah, I'd have to agree with that, Chris. I watched most of the St Kilda Freo game avidly to see whether I'd be sitting there chewing my fingernails off a bit later in the afternoon. And yeah, once that game was done, it sort of meant we could all just sit back and relax and watch the game and hope that there'd be no injuries, which I think other than Perko looked like he was a bit proppy after going off early. Everybody seemed to get through the match well. Peter Wright in the first half was outstanding. Took some big marks, kicked 4 goals. Dev Smith was back to his absolute best, and not just playing well, but playing smart footy, unselfishly, dishing the ball off. None of that stupid, hitting blokes after they've kicked the ball. It was just a really, really good performance. Draper, I thought the longer the game went on, the more he got into it. I think Grundy was on top of him a bit early, and I think the stats sort of, if you look at the first half, clearances and hit-outs, we were a bit behind, but it was pretty close by the end. But all in all, it was a reasonably solid hit-out without being, absolutely insane. So bring on next week.
Yeah, we'll talk about next week, Dave, because as I said, yesterday's game, it was a pleasing win, but there's not much to talk about that we haven't really already said about, the likes of Redmond playing exceptionally and Ridley and everyone else. So we will move on to next week. And I think Grizz summed it up well for mine, Dave, in that yesterday, some of the fringe players really stood up. I mean, if you'd asked me probably prior to yesterday, you said, look, who's going to be dropped? I would have said, Waterman comes out for Langford, but Waterman's kicked 4 goals, so he's almost become undroppable after that performance. And at the moment, I think there's 2 changes that can be made, and I think Dylan Clark out for Tippers are just a no-brainer. And I think if Langford's fit, he comes in for Durham on that wing. But I mean, how do you see it? Do you see any changes different to that?
No, actually, I don't. But my son and I were walking before, and we were chatting about, if we do make any changes, who comes out, and Clark was the first one, and then it was really down to, if Perkins is fit, it's probably Durham, as stiff as he'd be coming off 15 possessions. A month ago you'd have been looking at maybe Dev Smith because of the way he was playing, maybe Cutler because of the way he was playing, but with the way that they've played in the last 3 or 4 weeks, you really couldn't omit them. The interesting thing for me is going to be what they do with Cox. Do they play him as the emergency again, or do they risk bringing him in for a final when he hasn't played in a couple of weeks? But they're the only changes that I can see. I couldn't see them bringing in anyone other than Langford and Tip and Woody. They've just missed too much footy.
Yeah, I would say the changes. If Tipper's right to go, he's in, and Clark's the one to go out. I think Clark's been solid for us, but I thought, and I posted this on the board, that there were a couple of times where the heat was on and his disposal was just lacking. There were a couple of opportunities to go inside 50 where he put it straight over the top of right stringer's head instead of just hitting up the lead. And I think, as honourable as he's been, he probably loses his spot to the better player in Tipper. The question will be Langford. You've got to get Langford through. There's no point bringing him in for him to break down halfway through the match. If he comes in, I think it's Durham or Cox. It's interesting with the sub, but Cox can play more positions. So you can play forward, wing, back, a little bit of relief ruck, if you need to. But Durham has been in the better form. So I would almost go Durham as the sub, because as good of an experience it would be for Cox, we want to win this game. And so if we have to bring someone on, I think Durham showed more, particularly against the Bulldogs when he had a really good game, to cement his spot in the side. But it's great to have guys pushing for selection. Guys like Caldwell and Hooker as well. Caldwell, I can't imagine would bring him in off a pracky match and no senior games before the finals. But it's sort of weird to be going into a final series and having guys pushing for selection and having to talk about some unlucky misses. It's
certainly a change from previous years when we've scraped into the finals and sort of been the walking wounded or without a ruckman. I think the other thing to take into account too is where the game's been played. We're playing in Tasmania. We're not playing under the roof at Marvel. The forecast, from what I can see, is for windy and a little bit of rain, not a lot. So I think that mitigates the risk of maybe having Durham as the sub instead of Cox, even though Cox gives you more options. So I wouldn't be too unhappy if that was the side. But Langford, as you said, he's got to be cherry ripe, because if he does his hamstring 5 minutes into the first quarter, that'd be disastrous.
It is actually meant to rain on Sunday down there, so that sort of probably weighs heavier towards Durham playing than Cox. The only question I have is there was speculation that Durham may have had a slight hamstring twinge during the week. So if he doesn't get up, or if there's any doubt over him as well, obviously then Cox would probably end up being the sub should Langford get up. I do just want to touch on Dylan Clark though, because you did raise, Grizz, that Durham sort of cemented himself against the Bulldogs. Well, Clark against the Bulldogs, he had 19 touches, and then last week against the Gold Coast, I think he had about 16 or 17. He kicked a goal, and this time last week, he was probably in front of Durham, maybe even in front of Dev Smith, Alec Waterman. He was probably in front of a few blokes, and then these other blokes just have a ripper of a last round, and all of a sudden the poor bloke gets shafted out of a final spot. Should Tipper get up, obviously. It just shows the competition for spots in the side at the moment is just very, very high, and you can't even afford to have one bad week, because then you could be, unfortunately, the bloke who misses the chair in the go-around. So it's great to see, and something that, I don't think we've seen at the Essendon Football Club for a very long time. Yeah, just with Clark, the reason he's out for Tipper is, for mine at least, is purely positional. I think you're right. His last 3 weeks have been good by Clark, and I'm just looking at the forwards, because if you're bringing in Tipper, you're not bringing out a wingman or a midfielder. Clark's probably was the least efficient forward, I would say. Not to say he was poor, but the least efficient forward the last week, and maybe against the Gold Coast he got a lot of ball, but he wasn't necessarily effective hitting the scoreboard. He might have snagged one. So it was purely positionally, whereas I think
Darren plays on the wing, so you're not necessarily bringing him out for Tipper to come in. But he's definitely potentially coming out if Langford's right. And if it's raining, I don't think you play Cox either way, to be honest. Bulldogs have a big midfield. If it's wet and it's rain, the ball's going to be on the deck a lot. You don't want a 200-centimetre skinny wingman as your sub, because that's not the sort of body type or position you really need if it's going to be a wet slog of a game.
No, you need someone with a little bit more weight, as we saw at the start of the season when we played Brisbane in the wet. We had a lot of inexperienced and smaller bodies out there compared to theirs. And, I would have said up until yesterday, Dev Smith was in the gun, but with his game yesterday and his experience and maturity in terms of his body, I wouldn't be dropping him for a final that's going to be played in the wet. And I think that also puts paid to any sort of romantic notions of Hooksy coming back in, as much as I'd love to see it. With Francis and Peter Wright in the forward line, we can't afford to play three talls, not if it's raining.
No, look, the only way I saw Hooker coming back in was if Laverde had got done for his little rib tickler behind play, and then then I would have thrown Francis back and brought Hooker in as the extra forward. But I actually haven't seen the match review details.
No charges.
So no charges. So. Yeah, I mean, I figured by now if he'd been suspended, I probably would have read it on the board. So, unfortunately for Kale, I don't see a way forward for him in our side at all, unless there's injuries. When we do play the last day in September, maybe we bring him in as sub just to give him the premiership medal. Because I don't know about you boys, but even watching him get it in Perth, it would be sensational to see Kale accept a medal. But obviously, we have to get over the Dogs first. The other one I want to talk about, Dave, is the ground. I mean, if I was the Western Bulldogs, and there's been talk this year that the AFL has shafted us and all that, and, we've had different opinions, and I think we had a good discussion here last time on it. But if I was the Bulldogs, I'd be filthy, because Tasmania showed last time how Essendon-centric it was, and they've essentially sent the Bulldogs down in a home game into what you could probably call our second home.
Yeah, look, they would probably be filthy from that perspective. But the other thing about it is, I don't think it really matters where the game's played. If there's a crowd, we're going to have an advantage, maybe not quite to the degree that we'll have in Tasmania. From what I read, it was their choice to go to Tasmania because they didn't want to go to Adelaide and do the isolating that the South Australian government has mandated for teams travelling into Adelaide and back now.
I think they did request Adelaide, Dave.
Did they? Okay.
They did, but the quarantine from in and out in Adelaide was going to be more difficult with 3 games there over the weekend, whereas Tasmania allowed them to fly in and out after the games. So I think that was the reason. So the Bulldogs actually got stiffed because they finished 5th and Port Adelaide finished 2nd and Melbourne finished 1st and wanted Adelaide.
They got their choice.
The Bulldogs got stiffed.
Yep.
Yeah, so I think at the moment the Bulldogs are saying that they were happy to go to Tasmania, but I think they're very much just towing the party line now that the AFL has dictated. Yep. And it's rough because, I mean, they could have sent them. We could have gone to Brisbane, really. I see what you mean by the crowd. We definitely would have outnumbered them no matter where it was. But, after seeing what we did to Hawthorn, it's a rough task for a home game.
Oh, it is. And I think they'd probably be more annoyed by the fact that they probably played better on the Adelaide Oval than that they do down in Tasmania. I think if the match had been scheduled for Adelaide, they'd be shorter favourites than they are. Bigger ground suits their sort of running game a bit more. I'm not sure that the crowd so much has an impact on the players. I think it's probably more the ground. But, we'll see.
I think the conditions are going to have the biggest effect on the game. If there's the standard 4-goal wind at Lonnie, that all of a sudden creates an element of chaos within the structure of the game. It's also not like at Etihad where it's pristine and it's sort of tactic versus tactic, quality versus quality. The wind creates this sort of chaotic element to it where if the wind is just 5 to 10% harder blowing when you're kicking into it than they're kicking into it, it can just become so difficult. And it probably suits their handball happy style, to be honest, more than maybe our clearance, quick possession style and marking inside 50. But I think the crowd's capped at 10,000, isn't it? It's not going to be a huge crowd. Still, considering the numerical advantage we had over a team that's been there for like 15 years, well, I imagine we're going to outnumber the Bulldogs.
I did have a laugh, actually. You mentioned the wind. I did have a laugh. There was a couple of Bulldogs fans on the board in their pre-game thread trying to tell everybody there's no wind in Launceston, that because it's in the Tamar Valley, it's actually sheltered and there's no breeze. And I was reading that going, these guys actually ever been to Launceston? It is, and have they been to York Park? It's an absolute hellhole. It blows a gale on the stillest of days. So it does make me laugh sometimes when people on BigFooty and that certainly happens on Outboard too. They just get something stuck in their head and no matter what you say, you just cannot convince them that what they're saying is absurd. But anyway, the other thing that I think will be interesting from the Bulldogs' point of view for us is do they take the risk on Steph Martin? Now, I've been reading a lot that he has only been playing, half a VFL game or half a practice game, whatever the practice scratch matches are. That's not enough, I don't think, for a ruckman to come into an AFL final. But having said that, can they afford not to? Because Tim English got pantsed by Draper, and if they give up the first tap out of the ruck as frequently as they did against us last time, it's going to be a very, very tough game for them because their midfielders was probably one of the strongest midfielders in the league. They seem to rely very much on getting their hands on the ball first from their own ruckman. They don't seem to have that capability to rove an opposition ruckman.
Yeah, look, they have to take the risk with him. They have to. So I think he played 90% in their scratch match on the weekend and 75 the week before that. But those are those sort of 13-man scratchies that have, the intensity of a brisk walk. So it's not necessarily indicative of what it's going to be like at senior level, but they have to take the risk. Their whole game was predicated on clearance, winning the ball first and getting it forward, repeat entries. Because of the personnel of their backline wasn't as strong as other teams, the way they defend is getting the ball forward, locking it in there, and outpossessing the opposition with inside 50s. So if they can't win clearance, which they haven't for the last 3 weeks, they get pantsed. And it's sort of telling that Tim English is a 6'9", 205 centimetre, supposed to be ruckman. And they had guys like Mitch Hannon and Josh Dunkley and who else was it? Lewis Young running around the ruck against Scott Lycett with English playing. So it probably just tells you where their ruck stocks are at. But yeah, they've got to run the risk of Martin playing, or the alternative is sort of like you intimated, Bonce. There's going to be some intern being paid 5 cents an hour to just go through every centre bounce attendance Sam Draper's ever been in to try find some sort of pattern to shark it, because if they go Hannon or Young or English like they did, we'll dominate clearances again, which is probably one of the keys to the game, along with kicking efficiently for goal, which we have over the past month.
Yeah, you don't have to talk to Essendon supporters about what it's like to go into a final without a ruckman. I'm sure we all still have nightmares about that match in Adelaide.
Why would you bring that up, Dave? Why would you bring that up?
Simply from the perspective that you can't go in without it. So I completely agree with Grizz that they'll roll the dice. Unless he's on one leg and literally unable to run, they'll roll the dice with him, because it also means that they can throw English forward to somewhat try and cover Bruce, who's be a huge out for them from not just the last time we played, but from the rest of the season. I think he was top 4 goal kickers, top 4, top 3. So I don't see there's any way that if Martin can do more than walk, he doesn't play. Having said that, I'm not sure that that necessarily will be enough to give them the first use of the ball that they need. Sam's been in good form. He came up against probably one of the best ruckmen in the league on Sunday in Grundy and held his own. So I tend to think that the game's probably going to be won or lost similar to last time on the strength of our forward 50 entries and how well our forward line functions. I think they kicked 10 goals on the weekend against Port. They kicked 5 goals against Hawthorn in Launceston. They're going to need something up forward, because I don't see 5 or 10 goals getting a win unless it's absolutely pouring with rain and it's one of those games like we used to play against them at the Western Oval, where it was 4 goals to 3.
Yeah, I think you're right. I actually do think that it raining is probably going to be maybe a negative for us, in the fact that if it was dry and we could run a slingshot shootout style game plan. I just don't think they have the firepower up forward to be able to beat us in a one-on-one shootout. But having said that, they'll now kick 22 goals and we'll kick 21 and lose by a point now that I've said it. But at least it'll be an interesting game. The other thing I want to talk to about tonight, lads, and Grizz, I'll go with you first, mate, is the All-Australian squad. Now, obviously, Merritt, Parrish and Stringer from us have got in, and we'll talk about them in detail as well. But the one bloke I do, and I said a while ago that I feel like he's underrated. Well, he's not underrated, but it just gets forgotten how good he is. And I think, again, Jordan Ridley is incredibly stiff not to be in this All-Australian squad again. Now, I'm not saying he makes the final side. I'm not saying that he's a lock, but does he have the right to feel a little aggrieved that he hasn't made it again?
I think he made the 40 last year, didn't he? He didn't make the team, but Look, he's two things. First, he's a victim of his own standards. He's so consistently brilliant that he sort of just doesn't stand out as much as he should. I think the other thing is it's a very stacked field, the intercept possession defender. When you think of guys like Jake Lever and Tom Stewart, Nick Haynes, those sort of players, it's a stacked field. So I'm not sure it's reflective of his position in the game as opposed to just there are some absolutely outstanding players in front of him. I think what people forget about Jordan Ridley is he's like 22. Like, it's unbelievable how good this guy is. He's barely played 50 games, and I would say he's probably our second or third best player behind Zach and Jake. Parrish rakes up the numbers, and we have some mercurial players, but without Jordan Ridley, I think our defence falls apart. He can play tall, small, intercept. He's the best kick in the team, or maybe outside Zach Merritt, the best kicker in the team. He's stiff, but it's sort of understandable considering the opposition he's up against. But I think by the end of his career, which is probably another 10 years, he'll be in the squad and the team soon enough, I'd imagine.
Yeah, look, I think he's probably a bit stiff, but when you've got, as you said, guys like Jake Lever, Alir from Port Adelaide, Stephen May, who's slightly different but still takes a lot of intercept marks, Tom Stewart, his time will come. It was interesting reading an article in the paper yesterday that talked about how Essendon's improvement hadn't come from its young kids. It had come from players in their fourth, fifth, sixth and seventh years, and they included Ridley in that. I thought, I'm not quite sure you know as much about us as you think. Pretty sure this is his third season. His time will come. The three that are there pick themselves from us. And when you look through the squad, there's not too many players. I mean, it's very difficult to point to a particular player and say he shouldn't be there. Hugh McCluggage, Toot Miller, Clayton Oliver, Christian Petrarca, Sam Walsh, Bailey Dale, Bontempelli, Charlie Cameron. There's some pretty handy players in that list of 40.
I think Jake Stringer makes it, but I think considering how stacked the midfield is in the AFL as a position, I would imagine one of Zach and Parrish are probably going to get in. I doubt we're going to get both. I would imagine it'd be Parrish because of all the medals he's picked up this year, but I quietly think Zach's had the more consistent year. I think there's been a couple of games where Parrish has been tagged out of it, like against I think it was Collingwood and I think it was Melbourne again earlier in the year, whereas Zach's been more consistently brilliant. But all three of them have had All-Australian worthy seasons. If any of them are in the team, you'd go, yeah, that makes sense. But like Dave said, that's anyone in the 40, really.
Look, I'll be honest. Out of the three, if Stringer misses, I'll probably be the most filthy about that because there's not too many players rolling around right now that do what he does, and that is, get his 5 or 6 centre clearances a game, goes forward, kicks a couple of goals, and also gets 16, 17 touches. Now, 17 touches or 16, 17 touches, it's not a lot in the modern game. Let's be honest. It is on the lower side, but he's just so damaging. He's clearly shown he doesn't need 35 touches to have an impact or doesn't need 44 touches like certain Hawthorn players to not have an impact. But it's just for mine, he does stuff that nobody else in the league seems to do at the moment. And I think if anyone was to miss out of the three, I'd probably be most disappointed if he was to miss.
Number one ranked player in the competition since round 14, according to the AFL player ratings, and the number 3 ranked player all year, apparently. So
yeah, I read the number 3 all year yesterday.
Just a ridiculous play. It might be Yeah, so I think number 1 since round 14 and number 3 overall for the year. If he doesn't make it in, it's bewildering. Like he's had an unbelievable year.
Well, there aren't too many players, as you said, that can do what he does. And they're actually talking about it on Fox the other night. When you look at the players in the squad, the only 2 players in the squad that I can see that can do what he does out of the middle and then go forward are Bontempelli and Petrarca. And Petrarca's probably played more forward this year than middle, I think. I'm not sure how you could not have Jake in the side. And with Zach and Darcy, it's going to come down to whether they value Parrish's clearance work ahead of Zach's running and delivery into the forward line. And I think if it was me, the fact that Darcy's probably struggled to break a tag a bit in the last few weeks would probably tip me slightly towards Zach. For a bloke that people deride as not being damaging, he does seem to get involved in quite a few of our scoring chains.
I think we're all probably on the same page here in that if, for example, Merritt and Parrish both missed out, you could look at the side and go, well, look, the midfield is a stacked midfield. It's hard to break into. You can sort of justify them missing out based on the fact that there are other midfielders out there who are just as good as they are. But just with Jake, it's just a case of there really isn't anybody. I mean, Bontempelli, he doesn't hit the scoreboard as much as Jake. Petrarca probably hits the scoreboard. I mean, Petrarca probably plays a very similar role to Jake, but I actually disagree slightly, Dave. I reckon Petrarca probably plays more midfield than Jake does. So I actually think he spent a little bit longer in the midfield this year than previously. So you look at that group of 3, and Petrarca and Jake, I think both probably get in. I'd actually have them on both half-forward flanks, though we know that the AFL will shove a midfielder into the half-forward flank who's kicked 8 goals for the year. So one of them will end up on the bench. But yeah, I mean, Bontempelli's another one. He's been good this year, but I'm starting to feel like that Bontempelli's reputation is starting to outdo his body of work. He was very good early on, but his back half of the season hasn't been that great.
I think Fox Footy had the stats that from rounds 1 to 12, he was the number 1 ranked midfielder in the competition. And then from round 13 to the end of the year, well, it might have been around 14, yeah. From 1 to 14, he was the best midfielder in the comp. And then from round 15 onwards, he's been the 28th best midfielder in the comp. So he's dropped off a cliff dramatically in terms of his output. And you can sort of, I think the last 3 weeks, you can really start to tell that when Bontempelli wasn't engaged in the game, they struggled. When that first quarter and a half against Port Adelaide, Bontempelli was everywhere. And then as soon as he sort of got taken out of the game by Port, the Bulldogs just fell apart. So I think it's a bit like Fife when he won a Brownlow after only playing 15 rounds because his form in that period was so good. I think Bontempelli's start of the year probably gets him in, but I agree with you. His reputation's preceded him over the last 8 or 9 weeks or so, to be honest.
I don't think he struggled to get. I think he got less than 16 possessions on Friday night in the end. I think someone I read or heard somewhere it was 14.
15 touches and a goal.
Yeah, which is, for a player of his reputation, is a pretty poor outing. And, had Port kicked straight, they'd have been well in front of that game a lot earlier than they were. So it'll be interesting to see who does make the cut. I'm just looking at the squad and they've got asterisks next to players that have never been picked in the final All-Australian team, and there's a hell of a lot of them. So there's going to be a few new faces. And I guess the one real standout for me is no Richmond players for a team that, has dominated the past 4 seasons and fallen off a cliff after we broke them in Perth.
It certainly is. And there's 21 fresh faces picked in the squad. So we could get a record for the, I think the most first time inclusions for a season was back in about 2012, where I think they had 14 or 15 newbies in there. I read that earlier as well. So we could see that again here. And you're right, no Richmond, no Collingwood, and no Lowell North. So disappointing for those clubs. Collingwood North, you probably understand. But yeah, Richmond, they're a tough one because Dusty, I think, still was their best player for large parts of the year, but he didn't play enough games to get in, really. Yeah.
Look, the only Richmond player that I would have had in the squad, and I'm not saying he would have made the team, was Riewoldt. And as much as I don't like him, he's a good player. And, that he showed his worth in that last few minutes against Hawthorn on Saturday. The goal he kicked from the boundary line, wrong side, never looked like missing, and then to scramble one from the goal square, I think he was a bit stiff to miss out.
Yeah, I think he kicked 51 goals for the year, Jack Riewoldt, which sort of snuck up on me. He was only, I think, 7 or 8 behind Mackay for the Coleman. So, but that's what Riewoldt does. He kicks his 2 or 3 every week with the occasional bag, and he just sort of slides along and kicks his 40 to 50 goals a year, which again is probably a victim of his own standards. But I think there's nothing more pressing on the All-Australian selector's mind than recent form. I don't know what it is, but generally if you have a good finish to the year, you can tend to get into the squad. And conversely, if your team has a shocking end to the year, like Richmond has, where they've dropped, I think, 7 of the last 10, and plus a draw, you probably find yourself falling out of their calculations.
There's one other bloke I just want to throw out as I think was potentially unlucky, and I reckon your point about recent form, Grizz, holds firm when I say this name. And I think Taylor Walker was actually stiff not to get into the squad as well, because I look at Jack Riewoldt and I go, well, Harry Mackay and Tom Hawkins both play that full forward role. Is he better than them? No, he's not. So, okay, I can understand why. But then you look at centre-half forwards, and I mean, Tex did play centre-half forward for a large part of the year. Am I crazy? I mean, he did kick 48 goals, and he was, single-handedly Adelaide's forward line for large parts of the year. It to me, he may have some complaints about missing out.
I think the PR disaster that would come from selecting him in the All-Australian squad of 40 would have been a fair mop-up by the AFL. And like you said, there were other guys around like Franklin and Riewoldt and Hawkins enough that you could justify his inclusion or his exclusion, on merit. But I think if you were to include him after the last 3 or 4 weeks he's had, there may well have been a riot.
We all know how important optics are to the AFL.
No, that is very true, lads. I'll be honest. I had put that to the back of my mind when I was going through the list of blokes that I thought were stiff in the forward line before. So that is an excellent point. And I'll withdraw my comment that he was stiff.
Look, if he hadn't opened his mouth that day, then you could have had a case. But unfortunately,
on his production, absolutely, you could make an argument. Unfortunately, though, we all know that it's not always about on-field production. It's not always about. It's sometimes more about the optics for the AFL, and that I suppose it makes sense. There's a brand to protect, but as Essendon fans, that can be a touchy subject.
So, lads, we will wrap this up. We'll talk about the matches this weekend. So, we'll start off Friday night. We have Port Adelaide versus Geelong over at Adelaide Oval. If you look back earlier in the year, Geelong actually got them at Adelaide Oval. They beat them by 21 points. I think Geelong probably has a chance. I'm still not sold on Port. I don't know what it is about Port. I'm just still not sold on them. I know they did beat the Bulldogs by 2 points, but the Bulldogs are in pretty average form. So look, I'll probably tip Geelong in this one, Grizz. Where do you see this one landing?
I have Port. The big thing for me is Geelong, since that game at Port early in the year you're referring to, Geelong have lost Tom Stewart and Mitch Duncan, and Port Adelaide have gotten back Zach Butters and Xavier Dersma. So I think both teams are probably are going to look pretty different. I think Port probably have the stronger team overall. And home field advantage, Port always play better at home.
I'm with Grizz on this one. I think Port will get there just. Geelong's form over the last week or so has been a little bit patchy. When they got out to 40 or 50 points in front of Melbourne, you could have put whatever odds you liked on them losing. They just never get beaten down there. And for them to let Melbourne back into the game like that, I'm not saying that they let them, and I think Port will have gained a lot of confidence out of beating the Bulldogs, even though they didn't play well. I just think their form's a little bit better at the moment.
So the next game is then, of course, the Battle of the Bridge, which is being held down in Tasmania, and it'll be the third time that the Swans and the Giants have actually played each other this year. That the Giants did get the chocolates against the Swans at the SCG back in early April. I think it was about round 6. I think they got beaten by a couple of points, and then they of course had the game at Metricon later in the year where the Swans got up by 26 points. I'm still wary of the Giants, Dave. I'll be honest. The Giants to me could be the surprise packet of the final. They still have a stacked side in there. They still have a lot of veteran players ready to rumble. And I think the Swans, the Swans still have Kennedy and Buddy, obviously, and Parker and a few others, but they do have a lot of youngsters. So I think if the Swans don't turn up early, I think the Giants could get the jump on them and put them away early. But yeah, I suppose the other interesting thing for us is Buddy watch is does he get to the 1,000th goal during this game?
Yeah, I think that's probably where a lot of the interest in the game's going to be. I think Sam Taylor, is it Sam Taylor's their defender? There's been a lot of talk about him. I thought he played reasonably well against Franklin the last time they played, and he's certainly been in good form for them the last couple of weeks against other opponents. It's going to be an intriguing game because there are so many matchups through the middle. They're stacked full of talent, both sides in the midfield. Whoever gets on top, their forwards are going to have a day out. The interesting thing will be, again, is what sort of impact the weather has. I think Franklin needs, 7? Is it 7 goals he needs to get to 1,000?
I think he needs 8. He's on 992, yeah.
992, yeah. Look, 8 goals in a final in Launceston, windy. I think he kicked 15 down there against North Melbourne one day, 14. But I think that's probably where most of the interest outside of Sydney will be anyway. I mean, yeah.
Yeah, they're the sneaky form team of the last 3 weeks, the Giants. They've beaten Geelong down at GMHBA. They pantsed Richmond at Etihad, and then they did what they needed to do against Carlton, getting out sort of with no injuries and coming back from a pretty hefty margin. So there's sort of the sneaky team at the moment, Giants, and the Swans are in good touch as well, but I think these two have played in finals twice, and the Giants pant Sydney both times. So it's interesting. It will be a battle of the midfields. I do worry about Josh Kennedy missing for the Swans. If he doesn't play, I'm not sure they're going to have the cattle and the physicality to go with GWS in the centre. And we all know if GWS can get quality ball forward from clearance, and they're next to unstoppable. So I'll probably go with the Giants, and I would be surprised if the margin's within 4 or 5 goals, to be honest.
Well, Grizz, that does bring us to Saturday night, and it's Melbourne versus the Brisbane Lions at Adelaide Oval. Now, Melbourne did beat the Lions earlier in the year. They played them at the Giants Stadium. This was before the Sydney outbreak. It's crazy to think now that we were playing neutral games in New South Wales, but we did, and Melbourne did get them by 22 points. It was sort of an interesting one for Melbourne because directly after that game, they then went ahead and lost to Collingwood, got over us by 11 points, lost to GWS, put away Port, drew with the Hawks, and then lost to the Bulldogs. And since then, they've gone 98 points against the Suns, 9 points against the Eagles over there, 41 points over the Crows, and then, of course, got over the line against Geelong. So you would say that Melbourne are probably peaking at the right time of the year, but you can't can out the Lions, and obviously Joey Danaher could do anything in a final. There's probably a bit of excitement amongst AFL fans to see what somebody of his quality can do in a top final. Maybe not so much against Essendon fans. I'm definitely one of them that is going to watch that with extreme interest. But who do you have? I think Melbourne will probably get the chocolates done on Saturday night.
Yeah, I think at Adelaide Oval, it'll be Melbourne. I think Melbourne play the ground really well. Save that game against Adelaide earlier in the year, which was sort of really random. If you watch the game over, I think I watched it the day after, and there were so many fluky things that happened. But I think Melbourne are coming into really good touch. They had that lull about 4 or 5 weeks ago, and they're starting to work themselves into some good form. I think the Lions are patchy at the moment, and you can't be patchy against Melbourne in this touch. I think it'll be Melbourne, and again, I don't think it's going to be particularly close. I think it'll be Melbourne by 3 or 4 goals.
Yeah, I'm going to go with the Demons as well. Their form the last month, up until the win against Geelong, you wouldn't have necessarily said that they were world beaters in that, 3 teams they beat, Adelaide, Gold Coast, West Coast, all finished well down the ladder, albeit, they absolutely thumped Gold Coast. But, I think Brisbane, you could see they, at one point, on Saturday night, it looked like they were going to lose before they finally, extracted the digit and managed to get into fourth. So the only caveat again is as per Bonce that if Joe has a night out and sits on people's heads and he's kicking goals from the airport, then look out.
And Dave, that does bring us to the final predictor of tonight, and that is the Sunday game. Now, my heart says we're right up in this and we're a red hot chance. But my head is just saying there is a reason the Bulldogs were top four for most of the year. Bontempelli, Treloar, Caleb Daniel, Josh Dunkley, McRae. It's a stacked side. They are a very, very good outfit. And yes, their last 3 weeks have been poor. But as we've said time and time again, it starts again in September. I can't see them being off. I'd love to think that we're going to turn up and roll over them. And I do think that Draper's influence will be crucial. And I do think that if we get first hands on the ball, anything could happen. But at the end of the day, I just don't think it's going to happen consistently enough. And whilst I'd love us to break the finals winning drought, I do have to reluctantly tip the Bulldogs. But how do you see the game?
I'm similar in that my head probably leans more against us than my heart, but I don't necessarily agree that everything just resets because we're playing finals, particularly this year without the bye. You don't have that extra week to freshen up, to get rid of any niggles. They were playing for a top four spot on Friday night and couldn't get the job done. And in the last 3 weeks, they've kicked 12, 5 and 10 goals. Their forward line isn't functioning. They've lost Josh Bruce from the last time we played them. And I think that our forward line, particularly with Smith and with Waterman coming into a bit of form, Peter Wright, 4 goals and a half, I think our forward line is capable of kicking enough goals to get us over the line if we can break even in the midfield and get enough of the ball going our way. So I'm going to tip the Dons.
It's interesting. I think we should be really careful to read into the last game we played against them too much 3 weeks ago. When you look at that game and some of the stats, I think they won the inside 50 60-39. The disposals were 370-321. Marks inside 50 20-13. You play that game not 10 times with those sorts of stats. The Bulldogs win, sort of 9 times out of 10. The reason we won was we were just demolished on that clearance. Peter Wright kicked 7 goals straight, which is just remarkable. And I think they hit the post.
Yeah, they did.
They hit the post. They had. I think they hit the post 3 or 4 times. So if they kick 2 goals from instead of 4 posters there, they probably win the game. But the key to this game will be clearances, get the ball forward, lock it in there, and goal kicking. The past month, here's our goal kicking. 16-6 versus Sydney, 15-7 versus the Dogs, a bit of a blip against Gold Coast, 14-14, and then 16-6 against Collingwood. If we get the ball forward and we nail our shots on goal, we'll be in it up to our eyeballs. But I think if the Bulldogs get the game on their terms, which in the rain and the wind is every chance of happening, I'm not overly confident that their midfield isn't going to get their mojo back. So I'm tipping the Dogs reluctantly, but I'm hoping against hope, sort of, that we'll turn up. The key will be getting them early. If we can get them early, get out to a 3 or 4 goal lead quick and really put the doubt in their minds. Remember, the weight of expectation is on their shoulders. All the pressure, all the media scrutiny is going to be on the Bulldogs. No one expected us to make finals, let alone win one. So this is sort of a free swing in a sense. And if we get 3 or 4 goals up early, all that pressure is going to come down their shoulders. So I'm looking forward to it. I don't think we're going to get pants like we have in previous finals because we're not playing interstate team on their deck. But I'm tipping the Dogs, but hoping against hope.
And the last thing I'll just say about the final series is I do think it's nice to see different sides. So if you look at the sides competing, Port Adelaide last won a flag in 04. Geelong hasn't won one for 10 years. Sydney won one in 2012, but before that 2006. Then you go back to 1933. The Giants have never won one. Melbourne haven't won one since '64. The Lions last one was back in 2003. The Dogs are the most recent, 2016, and obviously we won in 2000. So regardless of the outcome of the final series, I think it's nice to see different sides, and if you take out, say, the Dogs and the Swans from the equation, then having a team win their first flag in over a decade, or a decade in Geelong's case, if they were to win it, is probably a pleasing thing from the AFL perspective.
Look, there's no doubt that they want to see different teams winning. They don't want to see, as much as Richmond winning 3 flags in 4 years has probably been good for the coffers. They want to see essentially every team winning a flag once every 18 years or near enough to keep the interest in the competition. And for them, I think the ideal result would be Melbourne getting up. They haven't won a flag in almost 60 years. Then GWS, it would be their maiden flag were they to win. Brisbane, it's been almost 2 decades. There's not too many teams in there that they'd be disappointed to see in the finals, and I think it just keeps things fresh and it keeps things interesting for supporters. The last thing we want as a competition is to see the European style soccer leagues where you've got the same 4 or 5 teams at the top every year, and everyone else is just making up the numbers.
Yeah, I'm really excited by this final series. I think the matchups work out well. I'm just happy Richmond aren't going to win another flag. That would be unbearable. Another 12 month of Richmond supporters on BigFooty. As a mod, it's terrible grand final day. But I will say, just quietly, and maybe this belongs on the unpopular opinion board, but if Port Adelaide win the grand final, I think Ken Hinkley becomes the sneaky one of the best coaches of the last 2 decades. He's coached 8 years. If he makes the grand final, grand final this year, would have been 3 prelims in 7 years, and a grand final. You don't hear him talked about with Brad Scott and Chris Scott and Luke Beveridge and those sorts of guys, but he's every bit the coach. So if Port win, I think we probably need to start having that discussion. But this isn't the Port Power podcast, so I'll get off that high horse.
I'll be honest, Grizz, if it was the Port Power podcast, he probably wouldn't get that much love because for whatever reason, they seem to hate his guts on the Port board, or at least half of them do anyway. But that will do us that will do us this evening, gentlemen. Thank you both very much for joining me.
You're welcome.
Yeah, it's a big weekend this weekend, and let's certainly hope that when we run next week's podcast, it's not a season in review. It's a preview of the semi-final against. Who will we get the semi-final? Will it be Melbourne or Brisbane or Geelong? Port Adelaide?
It'll be the loser of Melbourne and Brisbane.
I thought it was the loser of Port Geelong because the fixtures flip, don't they? So the qualifying finalists don't play each other in the prelims.
Yeah, that's right. So if we win, we play the loser of 1 versus 4, and then the winner of that match plays the winner of 2 versus 3.
Okay.
Dave is correct. So
I take it all back.
So when I was doing my ladder predictor earlier in the year, I had us beating Brisbane next week with Joe missing from the goal square, and then I think I had the week after us putting Port out with Fantasia doing something similar. Just a bit of a fantasy there.
Well, hopefully those dreams come true, mate. But yeah, as I said, thank you both again for listening, and we'll see everybody again next week.